Hi, Cubs, and welcome to while it's not our last day for Read Aloud, it is our last day for the Phantom Tollbooth. So, hello, thank you for joining me. And yesterday, to recap what the question I asked you about a couple of quotes and what you think that they meant. So, I am going to start and I'm going to find those quotes. I know exactly where they are. They're over here. One of the quotes I asked you about was this one, which is, "You must never feel badly about making mistakes as long as you take the trouble to learn from them, for you often learn more by being wrong for the right reasons than you do by being right for the wrong reasons." So I asked you about that quote and what you think Norton Juster wanted you to learn, and here are some of the responses I got specifically about that quote. One was, you can learn, Srivatsa says you can learn from your mistakes. Nishvita says learn from your mistakes. Sarvanch said the same thing, learn from your mistakes. Kaden says learn from your mistakes. Shreya said learn from your mistakes. And Diley also said you can always learn from your mistakes. So all of those friends all commented on that question. And I think that Mason, remember the other thing I wanted you to comment on was what you think Norton Juster was telling you with, this is Miss Candleberry's favorite quote, which is, "You may not see it now, but whatever we learn has a purpose, and whatever we do affects everyone and everything else, even in the tiniest of ways." It is much the very same thing with knowledge, for whenever you learn something new, the whole world becomes that much richer. And remember also that many places you would like to see are just off the map, and many things you want to know are just out of sight or a little beyond your reach. But someday you'll reach them all, for what you learn today, for no reason at all, will help you discover the wonderful secrets of tomorrow. And then Mason said to learn more. And Miss Candleberry thinks that this is probably that moment. I think that Norton Juster really wants to make a point to us in this book about learning, and how Miss Kennery would say, like, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to educate yourself, because that's going to make your life better. So to learn is learning makes our life better, and I think that that's one of the themes of this book. For those of us who understand what themes are, but I do think that's one of the biggest lessons that he wants us to take away, is that by learning, we are giving ourself a gift. We're making our own life richer, even if we can't see it now. So I think that that's kind of what he meant. And I feel like that is kind of, when I read that quote, which I love so much, Miss Canterbury feels like that's very much about, like, why you would be like an educator, why you would want to be a teacher. It's because you want to give that experience of learning those things. They're going to make somebody's life better and richer to somebody. Now, where we ended, as you know, they were going down. They were being followed by the terrible demons, and there were a lot of them. And they were right behind them. And and they were so tired. That is our climax, our most exciting point, right? That's the point where we don't know what's going to happen. Now, we're like right underneath it down here. We're dropping down because we're coming to our conclusion. Basically, right after the climax, that's when our conclusion happens. So our climax is, will they make it away from the demons? And so we're going to find out yes or no in a moment. And by the picture, you probably could tell a little bit. Here we go. And here, I'm going to start here. Closer and closer the demons loomed as the desperate chase neared its end. Then, gathering themselves for one final leap, they prepared to engulf first the bug, then the boy, and lastly the dog and his two passengers. They rose as one and suddenly stopped, as if frozen in midair, unable to move, staring ahead in terror. Milo slowly raised his weary head. And there, in the horizon, for as far as the eye could see, stood the massed armies of wisdom, the sun glistening from their swords and shields, and their bright banners flapping proudly at the breeze. For a moment, everything was silent. Then 1,000 trumpets sounded, then 1,000 more, and like an ocean wave, the long line of horsemen advanced, slowly first, then faster and faster, until with a gallop and a shout, which was music to Milo's ears, they swept forward toward the horrified demons. So when you look at the picture, can you guess who came there to save them? Let's see. There in the lead was King Azaz with his dazzling armor embossed with every letter in the alphabet, and with him the math magician, brandishing a freshly sharpened staff. From his tiny wagon, Dr. Discord hurled explosions after explosions, to the delight of the sound keeper, while the busy din collected them almost at once. And in honor of the occasion, Chroma the Great led his orchestra in a stirring display of patriotic colors. Everyone Milo had met during his journey had come to help. The men of the marketplace, the miners of Digitopolis, and all of the good people from the valley and the forest. The spelling bee buzzed excitedly overhead, shouting, "Charge! C-H-A-R-G-E, charge! C-H-A-R-G-E, charge!" Canby, who, as everyone knew, was as cowardly as can be, came all the way from Conclusions to show that he was also as brave. And even Officer Shrift, mounted proudly on a long, low Dotson, so a wiener dog, galloped grimly along. Cringing with fear, the monsters of ignorance turned in flight, and with an anguished cries too horrible to ever forget, returned to the damp, dark places from which they came. The Humbug sighed with relief, and Milo and the princesses prepared to greet the victorious army. "Well done," stated the Duke of Definition, dismounting and grasping Milo's hand warmly. "Fine job," seconded the Minister of Meaning. "Good work," shouted the Count of Consonants. "Congratulations," proposed the Earl of Essex. "Cheers," recommended the Undersecretary of Understanding. And since that's exactly what everyone felt like doing, that's exactly what everyone did. "It's we who should be began Milo when the shouting had subsided, but before he could finish, they had unrolled an enormous scroll. And with the fanfare of trumpets and drums, they stated in order that, "Henceforth and forthwith, let it be known by all men that rhyme and reason reign once more in wisdom." The two princes bowed gratefully and warmly kissed their brothers, and they all agreed that a very fine thing had happened. "And furthermore," continued the proclamation, "the boy named Milo, the dog named Tock, and the insect herein referred to as the Humbug are hereby declared to be heroes of the realm." Cheer after cheer filled the air, and even the bug seemed a bit embarrassed at having so much attention paid to him. "Therefore, in honor of their glorious deed," concluded the Duke, "in honor of their glorious deed, a royal holiday is declared. Let there be parades through every city in the land, and a gala carnival of 3 days' duration, consisting of jousts, games, feasts, and follies." The 5 cabinet members then rolled up the large parchment and, with many bows and flourishes, retired. Swift horsemen carried the news to every corner of the kingdom, and as the parade slowly wound its way through the countryside, crowds of people gathered to cheer it along. Garlands of flowers hung from every house and shop and carpeted the street. Even the air shimmered with excitement, and shutters closed for many years were thrown open to let in brilliant sunlight shine, to let the brilliant sunlight shine where it hadn't shone in so long. Milo, Tock, and the very subdued Humbug sat proudly in the royal carriage with Azaz, the math magician, and the 2 princesses, and the parade stretched for miles in both directions. As the cheering continued, Rhyme leaned forward and touched Milo gently on the arm. "They're shouting for you," she said with a smile. "But I could have never done it," he objected, "without everyone's help." "That may be true," said Reason gravely, "but you had the courage to try. And what you can do is often simply a matter of What you will do. Ooh. Pause for the wisdom that she just told us. She said, but what you had the courage to try. That may be true, but you had the courage to try. For what you can do is awful. Bleh. For what you can do is simply a matter of what you will do. So what you can do is often simply a matter of what you will do. Meaning it's not that you can't do it. It's just a choice that you make. So here we go. Let's pick up from here. That's why, said Azaz, there was one very important thing about your quest that we couldn't discuss until you returned. I remember, said Milo eagerly. Tell me now. It was impossible. Oh no. It was impossible, said the king, looking at the math magician. Completely impossible, said the math magician, the math magician. Completely impossible, said the math magician, looking at the king. Do you mean, stammered the bug, who suddenly felt a bit faint. Yes, indeed, they repeated together. Listen to this. But if we told you then, you might not have gone, and as you've discovered, so many things are possible, just as long as you don't know they're impossible. So many things are possible, just as long as you don't know they're impossible. And for the remainder of the ride, Milo didn't utter a sound. Finally, when they reached the broad, flat plain midway between Dictionopolis and Digitopolis, somewhat to the right of the Valley of Sound and a little to the left of the Forest of Sight. So let's see. Let's look. Kind of. Here's the Valley of Sound. So maybe right here. Because they said between these two. And in between these two. So like right here maybe. Somewhere around there. Or maybe it's here. Maybe it's here that they are. So let's go back and see. Finally, when they reached a broad, flat plain midway between Dictionopolis and Digitopolis, somewhat to the right of the Valley of Sound, and a little to the left of the Forest of Sight, the long line of carriages and horsemen stopped, and the great carnival began. Gaily striped tents and pavilions sprang up everywhere as the workmen scurried about like ants. Within 3 minutes, there were race courses and grandstands, sideshows and refreshment booths, gaming fields, Ferris wheels, banners, bunting, and bedlam almost without pause. The math magician provided a continuous display of brilliant fireworks made up of exploding numbers which multiplied and divided with breathtaking results. The colors, of course, being supplied by Chroma, and the noise by a deliriously happy Dr. Discord. Thanks to the soundkeeper, there was music and laughter, and for very brief moments, even a little silence. Alec Bings set up an enormous telescope and invited everyone to see the other side of the moon, and the Humbug wandered through the crowd accepting congratulation and recounting in great detail his brave exploits, most of which gained immeasurably by the telling. Think about what that means. So he's telling everybody how brave he was, and then it says every time he told it, it gained. That means it made him sound even braver. You can make a decision if you think that name still sticks. Because he's telling people how brave he was, right? At each evening, just at sunset, a royal banquet was held. There was everything imaginable to eat. King Azaz had ordered a special supply of delicious words in all flavors, and, for those who liked exotic foods, in all languages, too. The math magician had provided innumerable platters of division dumplings, which Milo was very careful to avoid, for no matter how much you ate, when you finished, there were more on your plate than when you began. And, of course, following the meal came songs, epic poems, and speeches in praise of the princesses and the 3 gallant adventurers who rescued them. King Azaz and the math magician pledged that every year at the same time they would lead their armies to the mountains of ignorance, until not one demon remained. And everyone agreed that no finer carnival, for no finer reason, had ever been held in wisdom. But even things as fine as all that must end sometime. And late on the afternoon of the third day, the tents were struck, the pavilions were folded, and everything was packed to leave. "It's time to go now," said Reason, "for there is much to do." And as she spoke, Milo suddenly remembered his home. He wanted very much to go back, yet somehow he couldn't bear the thought of leaving. "And so you must say goodbye," said Rhyme, patting him gently on the cheek. "To everyone?" said Milo unhappily. He looked around at all the friends he'd made, and looked very hard so as not to forget any of them even in an instant. But mostly he looked at Tock and the Humbug, with whom he'd shared so much, the perils, the dangers, the fears, and best of all, the victory. Never had anyone had two more steadfast companions. "Can't you both come with me?" he asked, knowing the answer as he said it. "Afraid not, old man," replied the bug. "I'd like to, but I've arranged a lecture tour which will keep me occupied for years." "And they do need a watchdog here," barked Tock sadly. Milo embraced the bug, who, in his most typical fashion, was heard to mumble gruffly, "Bah!" Get it? Bah, Humbug. But whose damp eyes told quite a different story. Then the boy threw his arm around Tock's neck and just for a moment held on very tightly. "Thank you for everything you've taught me," said Milo to everybody as a tear rolled down his cheek. "And thank you for what you've taught us." "No, and thank you for what you've taught us," said the king, and as he clapped his hands, the little car was brought forward, polished like new. Milo got in and with one last look stared down the road, with everyone waving to him. "Goodbye," he shouted. "Goodbye, I'll be back." "Goodbye," shouted Azaz. "Always remember the importance of words." "And numbers," added the math magician forcefully. "Surely you don't think that numbers are as important as words?" he heard Azaz shout from the distance. "Is that so?" replied the math magician a little more faintly. "Why, if—" "Oh dear," thought Milo, "I do hope they don't start it all again." And in a moment they had faded from sight as the road dipped and turned and headed for home. So here we are. He's kind of going this way, right? As the pleasant countryside flashed by and the wind whistled a tune on the windshield, it suddenly occurred to Milo that he must have been gone for several weeks. "I do hope no one's been worried," he thought, urging the car on faster. "I've never been away this long before." The late afternoon sun had turned now from a vivid yellow to a warm, lazy orange, and it seemed almost as tired as he was. The road raced ahead in a series of gentle curves that began to look familiar, and off in the distance the solitary Tollbooth appeared, a welcome sight indeed. For in a few minutes he reached the end of his journey, deposited his coin, and drove through. And almost before realizing it, he was sitting in the middle of his own room again. "It's only 6 o'clock," he observed with a yawn, and strolled through the garden. There were voices to hear and conversations to listen to in wonder and the special smell of each day. And in the very room in which he sat, there were books that could take you anywhere, and things to invent and make and build and break, and all the puzzle and excitement of everything he didn't know, music to play, songs to sing, and worlds to imagine and then someday make real. His thoughts darted eagerly about everything. Oh, no, wait. I skipped one. I'm so sorry. This is actually really important. So, "It's only 6 o'clock," he observed with a yawn. And then, in a moment, he made an even more interesting discovery. "And it's still today. I've only been gone an hour," he cried in amazement, for he'd certainly never realized how much he could do in such a short time. Milo was much too tired to talk, and almost too tired for dinner, so without a murmur he went off to bed as soon as he could. He pulled the covers around him, took a last look at his room, which somehow seemed very different than he'd remembered, and then drifted off to a deep, welcome sleep. School went very quickly the next day, but not as quickly enough, for Milo's head was full of plans and his eyes could see nothing but the toll booth and what lay beyond. He waited impatiently for the end of the class, and when the time finally came, his feet raced his thoughts all the way back to the house. Another trip, another trip. I'll leave right away. They'll be so glad to see me, and I'll. He stopped abruptly at the door of his room, for where the toll booth had been just the night before, there was now nothing at all. He searched frantically throughout the apartment, but it had vanished just as mysteriously as it had come, and in its place was another bright blue envelope, which was addressed simply, For Milo, who now knows the way. He opened it quickly and read, Dear Milo, you have completed your trip courtesy of the Phantom Tollbooth. We trust that everything has been satisfactory, and hope you understand why we had to come and collect it. You see, there are so many other boys and girls waiting to use it too. It's true that there are many lands you've still to visit, some of which are not even on the map, and wonderful things to see that no one has yet imagined. But we're quite sure that if you really want to, you'll find a way to reach them all by yourself. Yours truly. The signature was blurred and couldn't be read. Milo walked sadly to the window and squeezed himself into the corner of the large armchair. He felt very lonely and desolate as his thoughts turned far away to the foolish, lovable bug, to the comforting assurance of Tock, standing next to him, to the erratic, excitable Den, to little Alec, who he hoped would someday reach the ground, to Rhyme and Reason, without whom wisdom withered, and to the many, many others he would remember always. And yet, even as he thought of all these things, he noticed somehow that the sky was a lovely shade of blue, and that one cloud had the shape of a sailing ship. The tips of the trees held pale yellow buds, and the leaves were a rich, deep green. Outside the window, there was so much to see and hear and touch, walks to take, hills to climb, caterpillars to watch as they strolled through the garden. There were voices to hear and conversations to listen to and wonder, and the special smell of each day. And in the very room in which he sat, there were books that could take you anywhere, and things to invent and make and build and break, and all the puzzle and excitement of everything he didn't know, music to play, songs to sing, and worlds to imagine, and then someday make real. His thoughts darted eagerly about everything, and as everything looked new and worth trying. Well, I would like to make another trip, he said, jumping to his feet, but I really don't know when I'll have the time. There's so much to do right here. And that, my friends, is the end of the Phantom Tollbooth. Now, I will say, first of all, that Milo did have a character trait change. We talk about how character traits don't change. But the beginning, he was apathetic. That means he was always bored. He didn't really care about things. And at the end, we see that he's interested in things again. He's curious. And so, over the course of the book, this big journey that he took changed his character traits. Now, I want you to think back to the book. And we talked about how Norton Juster really focuses on learning and education and being interested in the things around you. And I want you to tell me one big lesson, or for those of you who understand, one theme that you can get from this book as you leave and you go about. What is one of the big lessons that you can learn by reading the Phantom Tollbooth? Because there are a lot, and everybody can get a different one. So please tell me what lesson you got from the Phantom Tollbooth. And thank you for listening to my favorite book with me. I really enjoyed reading it, as I do every year.